Start recording. There we go. All right, let me begin again since I started recording. This is the September 19th Congressional Candidate Forum of the Albany Democratic Club, and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming, and welcome to our candidates. We have Dr. Jennifer Tran with us tonight. We have Tim Sanchez, and we have Latifah Simon, and Director Latifah Simon. And if I'm forgetting a title that you have, apologies and please correct me. And Councilmember Tony Daysog is supposed to be here, but has not shown up yet. And candidate Denard Ingram sent his regrets earlier during the meeting. He will not be here. So we're going to start with the three candidates, and hopefully Councilmember Tony Daysog will be able to show up at some point. And let's go ahead and begin. And as I mentioned before, we'll have 2 minutes for the opening statement for each candidate. We're starting out in reverse alphabetical order. And if you could reset the timer, Brian, I'll go ahead and get us started.
It won't show up until I click start. So I'm
okay. Very
wait.
good. All right. Well, as I mentioned, the order will be Dr. Jennifer Tran, Director Latifah Simon, and then Tim Sanchez. So we'll go ahead and start with your 2-minute opening statement, Dr. Jennifer Tran.
Thank you very much for having us all here, and good evening, members and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And excuse me for the cough. I'm just recovering from COVID. But my name is Dr. Jennifer Tran, and I'm running for Congress because, like many of you, I'm so tired of the current state of the East Bay. As an Oakland native and ethnic studies professor, small business leader, and community organizer, I'm tired of looking at my community that I love and that raised me and see how much unnecessary suffering is going on while our ego-driven leaders engage in blame games and discord. I'm tired of being force-fed party line ideologies by partisan media. I'm tired of tribalist infighting both between the parties and within our own party. I'm tired of the leaders that want to talk about themselves instead of finding the courage to tackle the complexity of our issues. I'm tired of the bureaucracy, corruption, and fiscal mismanagement, despite living in one of the wealthiest regions and countries in the world. And when I'm tired, I think about the stories my parents told me about being stranded on boats for days while they fled their war-torn country. I think about how they scraped together their meager earnings to open a nail salon and toiled 7 days a week to build a better life for my siblings and our extended family. They taught me that when there are problems, I need to be brave, resourceful, and find solutions. That is why I'm running. Progress doesn't happen overnight, but we are all smart enough to recognize that there are failed policies emerging from our existing leadership that is endangering our quality of life. I stand for sensible solutions around public safety, homelessness, and thriving economies that are not attached to tribalist ideologies. I stand for cooperation between two parties and within our own party. And I stand for redefining the future of what progressive movement actually looks like from this incredibly diverse and beautiful community we call home. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much. And 2 minutes opening. Our next candidate will be Director Latifah Simon.
Good evening, folks. I will wait actually till we start the timer. Great. Good evening, colleagues, and good evening, members of the committee. I am so excited to be here tonight. There is so much going on internationally, on a federal level and locally. I get that. And for the last 30 years, I have put my feet and my hands and my brain and spirit in the mud. I have led successful organizations, beginning with my political home, the Young Women's Freedom Center, which is now a 30-year institution that has housed over 1,000 young women, that has created a pack of over 5,000 young women who have been in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. I reduced recidivism amongst a population that was extremely hard to reach, and developed a beloved community, which led me to receiving the MacArthur Genius Award. I was actually the youngest woman to receive that award, running a public safety NGO, which then led me to work with Kamala Harris in defining what it means to work in a law enforcement institution and tackle extremely difficult issues. At the heart, I'm an organizer. At the heart, 7 years ago, after the death of my husband, I became an elected official to fix an institution that has been broken for 40 years. I have a long way to go, but as a BART director, I brought $3 billion back home during COVID to ensure that our institution would continue to run. I am solution oriented. I'm about the people. As a single mother, I pride myself in getting it done. I'm running for Congress, and I hope to talk to you all more about my ideas tonight, and I welcome an amazing conversation. Thank you all so much for having me tonight.
Okay, thank you. And for the next 2-minute opening statement, we have candidate Tim Sanchez.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Well, for many of you, you probably have no idea who I am, and that's because I have not spent a lifetime in organizing or in the nonprofit space or working as an activist. I'm like most voters in the district. I am out there trying to make the best life for myself and my family and for those around me who matter. I have deep ties to the district. I grew up in East Oakland in the Fruitvale neighborhood, product of the Oakland Unified School District. My family arrived, my father's father arrived into West Berkeley in 1932 from Mexico. My mother's family arrived from Puerto Rico into West Oakland in 1956. Life wasn't so easy for me starting out. I was a teenage parent, had to rely on government assistance, and had to drop out of college after my first year. I was the first in my family to go to college, but I had to step aside and figure out how to support my young family. I didn't want to become another Latino statistic. I worked hard during the day and at night, took classes at the community college level, eventually got my degree from USF and went on to earn dual MBAs from the Haas School of Business at Cal, as well as Columbia University. And after 9/11, like many Americans, I felt that I needed to do something and joined the Navy Reserves, where 20 years later, I serve as a lieutenant commander. I have spent over 25 years working across various industries, from tech to aerospace to financial services. And I've even been a small business owner, opening up a family-run business in the Uptown neighborhood, a cafe and art gallery called Tertulia that was open for a number of years. I don't have all the solutions, but what I do know is what we're doing now, it ain't working. And I think we need a fresh set of eyes to go after some of the challenges we're facing in our district. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so I do not, once again, candidate Denard has given his regrets for tonight, but I still do not see Tony. Anyone correct me if I'm wrong. Councilmember Tony Daysog has not yet shown up, although he did confirm tonight. Well, we'll just have more chance for the other candidates to participate in the conversation. So now I just want to remind the audience, we've got a few pre-prepared questions I'm going to start asking now. But if you have audience questions, please put them in the chat, and we will grab them out of there and collate them and ask as many of them as we have time for, and we might have time for a number of them. So feel free, go ahead and put your questions in there. And I'm going to just go ahead and start with the prepared questions. Need to pull those up. And officers, did I forget anything, or can I proceed?
And I think you said the first question is going for Lateefah Simon.
That's right. So now we'll start with Lateefah for the first question. Okay, so we'll start with the first question for all the candidates, and Lateefah Simon will go first.
Hold on 1 second. So
It's 1 minute.
I have to figure out how to get back to my oh, here it is. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, all right, thank you. Pardon me. Barbara Lee is an icon. How do you propose to carry on her legacy, or do you? How will your top priorities and or policies continue her legacy or go down a different path? Director Simon.
I want to be clear, with 1 minute, I'm going to talk real fast. Barbara Lee is my mentor. She was my professor. I've been working very closely with her for the last 20 years. I am a Mills woman, as was she. In fact, she has invited me to sit with her at the Congressional Black Caucus a prayer breakfast on Saturday. And Barbara and Ron, who were both mentors to me, God rest his soul, spent the majority of their living lives fighting for folks in this district, from creating an internationalist politic to pushing a free South Africa, to creating an opportunity for men and women, transgender folks with HIV, to ensure that the CDC created research opportunities for queer folks, for straight folks. The reality is that no Democrat without progressive credentials who have served deeply in this community should have the opportunity to follow in their footsteps. For 30 years, I've been fighting. And so I'm set to serve. I will continue that legacy. Thank you so much for the question.
Okay, thank you. And Tim Sanchez.
We all have big shoes to fill should we get elected. Not only filling Barbara Lee's shoes, being a lone voice on so many important issues, but Ron Dellum's before her. I think we're at a critical point in time, though, in our history where we really need to rethink the priorities as a nation. I have ideas, I have positions that you don't tend to see in the mainstream Democratic Party, but I think we need to move in a different direction. Barbara's been so good on so many issues. It'll be nearly impossible to fill those shoes, but there's a long-standing tradition in history here in this district, Berkeley, Oakland, and the surrounding communities. I'm looking forward to standing up and carry on that tradition and pushing forward progressive positions and values.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Tran.
I agree with many of my colleagues in terms of the legacy of Representative Lee. And when we think about Representative Lee, we think of Barbara Lee Speaks for Me. And that is the power of Representative Lee being able to not just stand in line with her values, but reach across aisles and groups and communities to make sure that our dignity and our humanity is heard, whether that's immigration or API communities or migration of communities as a result of climate change and political persecution. And so I will continue to show up for communities as someone who is born and raised by this beautiful community. And at the same time, it's this generation that is calling out for representation for people who live at the intersections of identities, for folks who identify as queer, BIPOC, as business owners, as mixed generations. And I believe that our representation requires us to begin to take that conversation to another level where we are at the moment. And the present.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Okay. We're on to our next question. And Tim Sanchez, Mr. Sanchez will be the first to answer. And the question is this. Crime in the region is often in the news and are on people's minds these days. Is addressing it a priority for you? What do you think a congressperson's role should be on this issue? Mr. Sanchez.
I grew up in East Oakland and violence was always present. I have never seen it as bad as what we're experiencing today. And many would say it's a local issue, that the federal government doesn't have a role. I disagree. When I talk to family and friends in the Fruitvale neighborhood in particular, they tell me they want more police on the streets, not fewer cops. They want good cops, cops who they can trust. And I think there's a role for the federal government to step in and to provide additional funding to the cities that are struggling to pay for a larger police force. I think we need to rethink our police model. We need to fund to make sure that we have mental health professionals who can serve as first responders. Cops are not trained to address the issues or the concerns or the crises that are experienced with individuals suffering a mental health crisis. Lethal force is not the answer, but we can tie additional federal funding to reforming police work. And one of the things we can do is remove investigations from internal affairs and send it to the Department of Justice in order to rebuild the trust between the community and the police force.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Dr. Tran.
Thank you for that important question. As public safety are one of my priority issues for running in this race, because as a Vietnamese American woman, every person in my family, including recently my 80-year-old uncle, has been affected by the recent violent crimes that's been ensuing over the years and has been exacerbated since the pandemic. And as well as my Black and brown neighbors and friends and loved ones been impacted by police brutality and other forms of racial targeting. And I believe that we need to treat public safety as a public health issue by addressing it comprehensively. I served on the Community Policing Advisory Board, in which we're working on healing the relationships between law enforcement and community. And this requires investment at all levels of government. Oakland particularly is experiencing, like many other hubs, a $360 million budget deficit. We need federal and state infusion of capital, but also oversight so that we can have safer streets for our communities.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tran. And finally, Director Simon.
Thank you. Here we go. I'm proud to say that the only person in this race who's led a public safety program that has been nationally recognized, actually 2 public safety programs that reduce recidivism amongst both young men who've been on the streets in the underground street economy and young women. It's really important that we think about these statements that we've not been here before. If you look at the crime data from 1992 to 1998 in this district, we were exactly here before, and we had 700 cops on the streets. We know, data shows us, not just by emotions, that we need an ecosystem of supports right now, locally. I'm running for federal office, not local office, but an ecosystem and resources from both DOJ, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but also a national platform that tells us our community organizations, our law enforcement, both sworn and unsworn safety staff, have to figure out how to coalesce and do the right thing. I've done this with BART, and I'll continue doing it in Congress.
Thank you, Director. Okay, so I think the next question, we're going back to, since Tony is still not here, we'll go back to Dr. Tran for the first answer. And the next question is, the Bay is in a housing crisis, but over the past several decades, the federal government has largely withdrawn from housing. Is housing a focus for you? And what would your priorities be for housing at the congressional level? Dr. Tran.
I love this question because I teach at Cal State East Bay, particularly on race in the city, historical origins of racial segregation, and the role that public federal institutions played in creating racial inequalities in our country. And so the federal government has a role, not just reversing it, but also making it easier for people to create affordable housing, not just for unhoused, but for all income levels. And so housing all of our residents is my priority for this race. As someone who has a really stable job, I'm unable to afford a home as a younger person in this race, and that's real. And I believe that not only do we need to build new housing, but federal policies that allow subsidization of organizations that are able to acquire existing housing inventory will allow us to provide housing today rather than 6 to 7 years from now.
Thank you. And Director Simon.
Thank you. I love this question as well, because it is what not only the region, but really the coast and the nation is struggling with. You know, we have so many beautiful things that separate us, but also bring us together. As the only person who was raised and grew up in public housing, had my first baby as a teen mom in public housing, I understand how difficult these issues are. And if you think about what we're going to do in Congress, it's important to attach ourselves to what's actually on the floor. That's why I support solutions like HR 4233, which was authored by Congresswoman Waters, and the Housing Crisis Response Act is about investing $150 billion. It's audacious, but it is thoughtful into low-income renters, into new housing opportunities in communities. We need density, but we need relief for renters and opportunities for home ownership for our people. Homelessness is an issue that I have been working on for 30 years, and I have housed thousands of young families. I know how to do this work, and I know how to make it work in Congress. Let's move these issues. Let's get the resources back home.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Sanchez.
Well, President Nixon killed off the federal housing program in the early 70s, and we've been paying a price ever since. Currently, there's one Section 8 voucher for every 4 or 5 applicants. The way we're nibbling at this crisis, we're never going to get anywhere. It's going to take 3 lifetimes at the current rate. The demand is too great. Federal government needs to play a role. We need to restart the federal housing program. We need to take money from the Department of Defense and allocate it to solving this crisis that we're facing. Right now, though, that's just part of the problem. If you had money and you wanted to build an affordable housing complex in the city of Oakland, for example, it would take 10 years to get it built. If the federal housing program is going to be restarted and we're going to come in with the resources, we need the cities to reform their processes. They need to streamline the permitting and the rezoning process they have in place so we can expedite new housing and get it up and running as soon as possible.
Great, thank you. All right, that concludes that question. I'm going to go switch to audience questions now. I see that some great questions have been coming in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And also I noted that there was one question that was directed to a couple of different, or only 2 of the candidates. We are going to be fair, we're going to ask all candidates all questions to make sure we stay fair. So the next question will be for Director Simon, and it's from the audience. And the question is this: where do you stand on reparations for Black Americans? And do you think that this should be addressed on the local, state, and national level?
It's such a great question because it's some of the work that, as a student of government, as a student of legislators in this district, Ron Dellums worked extremely hard to bring this issue up 25 years ago in Congress. And I am a supporter of reparations, but both local, state, right, and federal, we have to repair. We have to repair. And one of the things that I'm extremely excited about is some of the work that has been done by the UC Regents here in California. I'm on the CSU Board of Trustees, and I hope to do the work that they've done in terms of providing deep tuition assistance for both Native American and African American folks. The UC has made it free for registered tribe members to attend. We have a lot to do to repair deep structural racism at all levels. But without repair, we cannot move forward. Structural racism needs to be undone, and we do it from a policy perspective.
Thank you very much. And next is Mr. Sanchez.
I'm in favor of reparations at all levels of our government, but in particular at the federal level. We are still paying the price for the original sin in this country. And restitution is something that I feel strongly about. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's even biblical. What I would love to see happen is for the federal government to play a role in trying to right some of the wrongs by restoring the lost economic might that African American families are still suffering from. I would love to see a trust account established. We can debate the dollar amount, but I would love to see a trust account established for every African American family that they can tap into to pay for real estate, to purchase real estate, to pay for their children's college education, things that are going to increase wealth, close the inequalities that exist in those wealth gaps, but allow the federal government to serve as a reservoir or a bank account, if you will, that families can tap into in order to transform their family for generations to come.
Thank you. And Dr. Tran.
And given that we are in the Bay Area, I believe that we are all in support of federal government, all levels of government supporting reparations. And to my colleague Sanchez's point around restitution, I think the challenge of this country is our country and our systems work in silos, but we understand that racial inequalities that we witness over the years have to do with systems working together to disenfranchise communities. My community, particularly refugees community, are able to thrive, particularly because of the cohesion and coordination of services. So if we are going to have policies that ushers towards reparations and other forms of systemic structural repair, then I believe that we need to have a coordination of services. Once again, when my family came here, we were provided housing, required to work, accessing schools, and having a stipend for a sustained time that is able to sustain our communities. And so having a comprehensive integrated approach is really important.
Okay, thank you. And we'll start with Mr. Sanchez for the next question. Once again, we are on audience questions. What will you do at the federal level to help cities implement alternatives to police response to mental health situations? Mr. Sanchez.
Well, in talking to people who are working in the trenches every day, dealing with the unhoused and the unsheltered, one of the things that I hear time and time again, and the numbers could vary depending on who you're talking to, but roughly 30% of those who are currently unhoused, unsheltered, living in the streets are suffering from a mental health crisis. Another upwards of 70% are suffering from some type of drug addiction. We talk about affordable housing or a shelter or a unit as the solution. We first have to address the health issues that people are dealing with. If we're truly compassionate the way we all claim to be, then we should be willing to do whatever it takes to get these individuals back on their feet so they can live productive lives and be members of society. We need federal help, especially in the area of mental health services. We can't do it and rely strictly on what the county is capable of doing or even the state. We're now at a state of emergency crisis where the federal government has to step in.
Okay, thank you for that. And repeating the question for Dr. Tran, who is next to respond. What will you do at the federal level to help cities implement alternatives to police response to mental health situations?
Thank you for that question. I think alternative solutions to support our most vulnerable communities is extremely important. We have policies that have supported our vulnerable communities, particularly communities with disabilities or LGBT communities that are not being utilized to full capacity. And so it's extremely important that when we allocate funding and support, that there needs to be implementation of those. And what is accountability look like when cities and states actually receive those funds? And for cities who are opting into it, how are we ensuring that we're preparing our cities and leaders and entities with the right support? So not only do we need to invest in alternative mental health support, but also support in capacity building. During the pandemic, there was a flush amount of funds coming in by the trillions for the CARES Act, and yet our communities couldn't access them. We need to make that process more navigable for our responders.
Thank you. And finally, Director Simon.
The key to running and winning and being successful as a freshman Congresswoman is knowing how government works. And as some folks know, I am a senior advisor to Governor Newsom's police reform initiative, and I've worked very closely with the state. There are opportunities that we have not and we should continue to procure, including the Office of Justice, the DOJ's Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program. The acronym is JMHCP. We have not been successful in getting the resources that we should have. As Congresswoman, my work is going to continuously to collaborate with state and local actors and my good friends currently in the House right now to ensure that this state and particularly this district gets the resources that we need. I've enacted these programs, the Ambassador Program with Bay Area Rapid Transit. I know how to do this work. Particularly, we need more resources to be able to hire more staff that are connected with our sworn officers to meet the needs of our folks facing crisis. We know how to do this work. We have to get it done.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Tran will be the first to respond for the next question. And the next question, I think, might have been aimed for a particular candidate or candidate or two. So all the candidates can answer this however they want. And the question is, I hear your dissatisfaction with the current conditions in our community, but I'm curious as to what specifically you think needs to be fixed and how, as a federal congressperson, you will address the specific issues you are concerned with. And Dr. Tran, you are first.
Yes, thank you for that question. I believe that policies without implementation and engagement with communities leads to more frustration and inefficacy. As I was saying earlier about during the pandemic, policies that were meant to support communities ended up leaving communities outside of it. And a lot of it has to do with ongoing lack of language access, inequities in the policies, and the lack of due diligence for legislators historically. And so in terms of helping at the federal level, I think that being able to identify where funds need to be allocated, being at the committee, are very important to make sure that our constituents in District 12 are represented. But more than anything, the coordination, again, the accountability to ensure, and I'm glad that our my colleague Lateefah Simon brought up our Governor Newsom, and he's asking, how is it that despite so much funding that our results still look like this? And so being able to ask the hard questions and shorten the level in which work is being done is extremely important. And that's where I would go back to creating more homes with existing housing stock that leads to more sustainability and quicker turnaround time to house our communities and the coordinated public safety approach.
Thank you. And Director Simon.
Please repeat the question.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a bit of a long one. I hear your dissatisfaction with the current conditions in the community, but I'm curious as to what specifically you think needs to be fixed and how, as a federal congressperson, you will address the specific issues you are concerned with.
It's a really important question. Thank you for repeating. You know, as somebody who has managed institutions since the age of 19, has been a single mother since the age of 19, now 2 children, and successfully gotten 1 through law school, I know how to get things done. I think that I need to be clear. I'm not running for local office. I'm running for federal office. The goal of an elected congressperson is to bring resources and to act as a juggernaut to ensure that what's happening in the district meets the values of the district and working collaboratively with the local electeds here. Fascism is here in the United States. Roe versus Wade has been overturned. I want to be clear. Social Security and Medicare are on the line. We have not been able to pass an assault weapons ban, right? I believe so deeply that the work that needs to happen in the Congress is about protecting our democracy while managing the real live work that is going on here and supporting our electeds and holding them accountable here. I'm set to do that work.
Thank you. And Mr. Sanchez.
Sure. I think the question was asking, give an example of something I'm dissatisfied with. I think if you look at the crisis we're facing with those who are unsheltered and unhoused, we're getting more of the same from every level of government. And I think we need to really look at this differently. There are some great things that the federal government can do that the federal government has demonstrated they're capable of doing well. The first thing I would do is I would get together with the rest of the Bay Area members of Congress, and I would lobby hard to get the White House to bring in FEMA. They wouldn't require an act of Congress. It would simply require an executive order. FEMA could come into the East Bay, into the 12th Congressional, and within 14 days, set up enough beds, 4,000 to 5,000 beds, provide food, shelter, mental health services, health services. It would be a short-term solution, but it would provide a safe environment where we can transition people and give them an opportunity to move outside of the dangerous environment they're currently living in, and then work on the long-term solution for affordable housing. But this is something we don't hear about from many of our local officials, and it's there for the taking.
Thank you. And I believe Dr. Tran is last.
I believe that I started.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. I knew this would happen. Every time I do this, I lose my place at least once. Did all the candidates get to answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, so okay, I got ahead of myself there. Okay, so Director Simon will be the first to answer the next question. I'm going to skip over a question I see here because it touches on a topic that we covered a little while ago and ask this question. Can you give one or more examples of statewide or federal legislation you helped get passed at the state or federal level? What's been the key to your success in successfully implementing policy change at that level? And Dr. Simon.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, I
sorry,
wish I was a doctor.
Director.
One day, one day, one day. My MPA is not a doctor, and I applaud Dr. Tran for all of her focus and study and leadership in the area of academia. I early on, I helped to literally write legislation with Kamala Harris when she was the the district attorney, to create the Back on Track Act, which provided more resources for reentry. I will stop.
Let's pause the timer.
Clock
We've
is
got some interference here. Let me see if I can figure out where that's coming from. Oh, did we take care of that? It looks like everyone's muted now. Okay. Apologies for that. Please go ahead.
Oh, no worries. This is where we're living. Thank you for the opportunity to start over. I have helped to usher much needed criminal justice reform, homelessness reform, both on the local and state level. And I can give you actually two local examples. In 1999 in San Francisco, I helped to lead a campaign to stop the shackling of pregnant incarcerated teens who were incarcerated in San Francisco Juvenile Hall. And there's many others, many other both advocacy and issue campaigns that I have led and won, very much focused around housing and civil rights and social justice, all related to making sure that we were living in beloved communities. I've been a state actor all of my life. I should say my elected life and my advocacy life. The clock is a little weird, so I'll stop now, but happy to talk to you all further.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for the interruption in that answer. And Mr. Sanchez, you're next.
Great. Well, just going back to my opening statement, I haven't spent my adult life working in politics or serving as an organizer or proposing legislation. I have been doing other things like putting 3 kids through college, building a business, hiring, running a payroll, doing what most voters do in this district, which is go to work, come home, try to provide for your family, try to give them a better life than what you had. And I've also served my country for the past 20 years, been deployed 3 times overseas to the Middle East, put my life on the line. But even with that, I think I have unique insight to say that we need to rethink our priorities. And the first thing I would want to do is join the Armed Services Committee to take a hatchet to the Department of Defense. Anyone who's ever worn the uniform knows there's so much waste taking place within the DoD. We're still funding a military machine that will never fight a war like World War II. We need to reallocate those resources to the social programs that we desperately need in our country.
Thank you. And Dr. Tran.
Thank you for that question. While I've been extremely active at the local level in my role as not just an educator at Cal State East Bay, but also president of Oakland Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, working to diversify and integrate our workforce in the Bay Area, I took a leave of absence last year to lead a national political organization called Pivot. And in that work, we made sure that we were pairing up with our leaders at the state and federal level. And Pivot joined forces with a coalition of other organizations to pass the bipartisan COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, and as well as standing up against the public charge. And I think part of the question that was asked here was, what has been the key to the success in implementing policy change at that level? I think it's important to work across our differences, being able to stand up for what's right, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's unpopular, and directly politically incorrect in the moment, doing the right thing when the moment calls for it.
Thank you for that. Okay, so all the candidates so far that I've seen are Democrats. And well, we're a Democratic club, so we're mostly concerned with supporting the Democrats. And here's a question about your alignment with the Democratic Party values. And the question is, how do you view yourself fitting in with the Congressional Democratic Party? Are there policies that are part of the party platform that you think are especially important to support, or those with which you do not agree? And I believe Mr. Sanchez is first.
Yeah, I would say that as a whole, I think the party has gotten away from addressing the issues that matter most to working class families. I think we've taken a timid approach to taking on Republicans in Washington. I think we need to be much more aggressive. I fought overseas to protect our democracy, and our greatest threat we're facing is here at home. And I think we need to step it up. I mean, one of the things that I would love to see happen is to reform our federal judiciary. I don't see enough calls for that. I would love to expand the court, one justice for each circuit court, which is what the original framers wanted, and impose term limits for federal judiciary. That would stop the politicization that we're seeing day after day out of this Supreme Court that is chipping away at our civil rights. And we're not doing enough as a party to combat that attack internally. That's one of the things that I think we need to do a better job of at the state level, advocating for that, and certainly in Washington. And I would be looking to do that day one.
Okay, thank you. And Director Simon.
Thank you. I don't think that there's an argument that in this country that Black women have been pivotal to the success for Democrats. And I am a deep blue Democrat, which actually means that I believe in the democratic process. That doesn't always mean that you have to stay consistent with every policy on the Democratic line within our party. For instance, I'm struggling with the White House and their analysis on how we deal with immigrants and refugees. The promise of this country is to provide a very clear access to asylum for folks who are escaping persecution. We have to do better there. We have to ensure that folks who are leaving persecution have a direct opportunity to stay alive, and that our country can welcome them with open arms, with open resources. I served on the Rules Committee in 2016 at the federal DNC, and I'm not a politician. I'm an organizer who knows that the cavalry isn't coming, that it's about us making decisions for ourselves.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. We're getting down towards the end. I think this might be our last question before we allow you.
I didn't get to answer the question yet.
Oh, I am so sorry. Boy, as the night goes on, I am just losing it here. So please go ahead. Apologies.
No, not at all. I'm just really excited to engage in this question as a daughter of refugees, as an API woman, and also as a queer API woman. There are topics that we don't touch within our communities, and politics has always been one of those. And so a significant population of our communities is are registered as independents. And a lot of that is rooted in a feeling that neither parties represent them and their interests. My family has, like many other families in this community, has turned to entrepreneurship in order to provide for their families. And a lot of that is because, like Latifah said, the cavalry isn't coming for us. And we've always had to keep our heads low and push through. And I believe that in order for us to have change in this country, we need to be able to have conversation and respect the differences, but making sure that holding a high bar for where we need to go together is going to be the way out, rather than drawing lines in the sand and seeing who is authentic and who isn't.
Thank you for that. And apologies, looks like I got the order mixed up in the last question between you and Director Simon. So now I believe Dr. Tran, no, let's see. Yes, okay, so the order should be that Dr. Tran will go first for the next question, which will be our last question. And it will be Dr. Tran, Director Simon, and Mr. Sanchez. And the last question before your closing statements will be, and I'm glad we got this question, how does our city of Albany fit into your vision as a potential congressional representative? Can you commit to direct interactions and collaborations with our locally elected leaders to inch toward shared goals, both on the city council and with the school board? And Dr. Tran.
Thank you for that question. And as a leader of one of the smallest chambers of commerce, Oakland Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce, and also if you saw me tonight, you know I'm quite petite. I believe in the power of small, and the small is mighty. And I think we are in the state that we're at because we overlook communities that don't represent a large swaths of constituents, but the experiences inform how is it that we're going to move forward. So I've started from the local, but have always, as a researcher and as a scholar, have had vision for the broader vision of where we want to go. So my commitment to working with local elected leaders doesn't go in terms of just emails and meetings and coffees, but building the bench, making sure that when I am elected as your Congress member, that we have not just representation, but new leadership who are bringing in diverse perspectives to inform the policies that we need to spearhead at the level. Thank you.
Oops, thank you. And Director Simon is next.
Albany has such an amazing history, you know, as we know that the Spanish colonized much of this district. And Albany was actually founded by the Spanish. And we know as a town that sits right on our sea, there's environmental impact issues. There are issues of rising home prices. But you know, the beauty of Albany and the people, the parents that I know that are in Albany, the elders that I know that are in Albany, many folks have settled there because they wanted what we all want. Amazing schools for their babies. They wanted good preschools. They wanted elder care homes. They wanted beautiful parks. They wanted open space. They wanted safe streets. And this collective idea of literally of California's 12th district, I know that we all want the same thing. I'm a mile and a half. I sit right at Emeryville, and I take my kid to El Cerrito every single morning to go to Catholic school. And I pass by Albany. I have friends and community in Albany. I've been organizing in Albany. Albany is a part of our collective understanding of what is amazing about the East Bay. We can't lose that.
Thank you. And Mr. Sanchez.
Well, one of the beautiful things about being part of a large family where I literally have about 400 cousins living in the East Bay is that I have many who live in the city of Albany who originally were from Berkeley. And I assure you, once elected, they will be chewing on my ear on a regular basis to make sure that their concerns are heard in Washington. I think it was said earlier, I think collaboration is needed and to build a bench. I respect those who have devoted a lifetime to politics and serving, but I think we're at a critical point in time in our nation's history. Then you look at the issues we're facing locally where we just need a fresh perspective. We live in a neighborhood here where there are so many smart individuals. The influence of UC Berkeley is enormous. I would love to tap into officials here or locally who are often overlooked. But more importantly, build a collaboration with those who want to be heard in Washington and have never had the opportunity to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. Excuse me. Let's see. I believe we're going to run a teeny bit over. Hopefully, the candidates don't have to run away right at the stroke of 9. But we do need to allow you to make your closing statements of 1 minute each. And keeping with the rotation, we will start with Director Simon.
Thank you so much. I am extremely honored to be running for Congress. And as somebody who has been a steward of service and a folk of people, as someone who is the sole caretaker for my late husband's mother, I'm a mother and an organizer and an institutional leader. I've been backed by the labor community throughout the East Bay and frankly, the nation. I have over 60 elected officials, and we're just getting started endorsing my campaign. I am a fundraiser, but more importantly, I have allies in Washington who want what we all want. The Congressional Progressive Caucus endorsed my campaign, knowing that that's over 110 congressmen and women who have and share our progressive values around environment, around justice, around a woman's rights to choose, around Medicare for all, and I can continue. I'm going to go to Congress and fight and win with our party. I'm very, very excited to have your support. I would ask for it humbly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you once again for having me. As I mentioned in the opening, I'm not a politician, but I'm someone who loves our community deeply, someone who was born and raised here, someone who overcame tremendous challenges early on in life and was afforded so many opportunities to pursue the American dream. And I'm putting my career on hold because I fear that window is closing for others coming up behind me to pursue the American dream, to pursue opportunities. It's becoming more difficult to purchase a home in our district, to pay for college education. There are so many challenges with AI on the horizon and continued automation that will displace so many workers. We need someone in Washington who's going to have a fresh perspective and take on these challenges, looking at it from a different angle. I'm just fed up with, I don't want the status quo. I don't want more of the same. I want to advocate for the families who are living in fear, the families who are concerned about staying in the middle class and pursuing their own dreams. That's why I'm running. And I'm looking to become the first Latino elected to Congress from the Bay Area.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to take the privilege.
We still have one more.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Gosh, Dr. Tran, forgive me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Once again, thank you for the thoughtful and excellent questions that you've all shared tonight. As I've highlighted throughout this conversation, we don't have time for business as usual in our national political arena. We need to change the arena. And I am an ordinary person who never had political aspirations, but I couldn't stand on the sidelines. Our communities are in crisis. We don't have time for groomed politicians glad-handing campaigns to people who will toe the party line, promising us tiny incremental changes. We need real leadership. Anyone who has ever worked with a real leader knows that a real leader unites people rather than alienates them. A real leader is grounded in reality and finds ways to get the job done despite personality differences or ideological ones. Real leadership in Congress will look like leaders having the courage to speak the truth instead of having rehearsed talking points, talking about because our communities expect more from those who represent them. So make no mistake about it. This campaign is a fight for the future for our progressive movement. And I would be really honored to have your support, as I'm the only candidate in the race with the courage to tell the whole truth, no matter what any party might think. And that would be a step towards real progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, if you'll forgive me, I want to take a point of personal privilege and tell a very, very brief story before we close out. And I thank everyone. But if you just give me one moment, to compose myself. I'll be back in 2 seconds. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through this story because I do get a little choked up. I'm a bit of a crybaby. I can't help but let my emotions get through to me. And I think in preparations for this meeting, I was looking up Barbara Lee on my phone, and I saw that, oh my goodness, I have her cell phone in my phone. And why is that? Well, that's because I was mayor during the pandemic. And during the pandemic, Barbara Lee made sure to organize a bunch of meetings with all of the mayors in her district to check in and see how we were doing and what we needed. And I so appreciated that. And I'm hardly getting through this, but if you as potential future leaders can keep up with that type of leadership, if you can show that sort of leadership, you'll be doing well. Barbara Lee, as we have said, is an icon, and she does definitely speak for me. So with that, I want to thank you all candidates for being here. I hope it wasn't an emergency that kept candidate Tony Daysog, Councilmember Daysog, and Denard Ingram away from us. Hopefully they're doing okay. And so grateful for the three who could make it here tonight. Even though our city is small, it is mighty. We have over 20,000 people. We are a significant portion of this district, and we also vote in large numbers. We have a very high percentage, maybe the highest percentage in the district of voters in this city. People actually come out and vote. So do remember that as you go forward. Thank you once again for being here. We're going to transition into our membership only portion of the meeting in a moment. Thank you so much once again. If you want to drop any contact information in the chat in the meantime, please go ahead. And I'm going to start in with our membership and endorsement portion of the meeting now. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Nick, you want to stop the recording at this point?
Thank you. Appreciate all the help from my officers on this. As you saw, I certainly needed it.